I am so excited. If you guys were here this morning, I actually did a little preaching on this, and I just touched on it. It was a light touch. Tonight, I'll actually go into some detail. We're going to talk specifically about critical race theory, what it is, what it's not. The fact is, and you all know, we're under attack. Parents, children, culture, society, everybody in America is under attack by virtue of this. I talked about this morning that it is demonic. And if you weren't here, if you still have doubts, if you come in and you're leftist, progressive, moderate, whatever, and you think that, well, I don't believe that. Great, welcome. By the end of this, hopefully you have a change of opinion. We can talk about it. I'd love to have some discourse with you about that. And that's what this is all about. So we welcome you here. I'm sure we have people from left, right, center. We have all kinds of perspectives here tonight. Good news is we're going to all be challenged to some degree, and irrespective of of where you come from, I do offer a challenge for everybody here, because while I know everybody is coming from a lot of different perspectives, because we didn't say, look, we just want our conservative friends to come, and we're going to just chop it up, and we're going to have a good time. We said, it's open to everybody. We can just bring whatever perspective you have. We're going to come, and we're going to figure this thing out. So, we have all kinds of people here from, who knows what perspective you have. But here's the challenge. It's a healthy challenge. This is what we're going to do. You're going to challenge your speaker here. This is your opportunity to beat up the speaker. How's that? Yeah. I'm a brother that you just say, look, okay, I'm gonna stay here to the end because I want to see this. Here's my challenge to you, from me. My challenge is that by the end of this meeting, we are all going to agree on reparations. Now, you may be a conservative and you say, Kev, you lost your mind. I ain't going to agree on reparations. Bear with me. We're going to agree on reparations. We're going to agree on systemic racism. Now, some of you say, oh, you crazy. We're going to agree on systemic racism? Yeah, actually we will. And we're going to agree on privilege, white privilege. Now that's something. If you can have a brother come up in here and say, look, from every perspective, we're going to come in this auditorium and, irrespective of the perspective, we're going to leave up out of here and say, yeah, that brother actually delivered on that. That's doing something. Now, here's my thing. If we can actually agree on that, I put that partner thing up there. If I can deliver on that, this is what you guys got to do. I want you to take that QR code right there. You go ahead and take a picture of it now, because I want you to become a partner. Because if I can deliver on that, you need to be partnering with us. Because I must be doing something right. We must have a compelling argument for people to hear. If I can deliver on that, there is something about the messaging that must be connected with people. Because what we're delivering, what we're actually talking about, if I can deliver with this spectrum of people here, I don't know where you come from. I don't know where your perspective is, but chances are a lot of people in a church environment like this, probably more conservative here than not. These are not conservative subjects, most likely. Matter of fact, some of y'all was tempted just to, I'm up out of here, man. Y'all crazy. Come on now. You was about, what? I thought I was going to hear about CRT. We was going to get, figure out a way to beat up on what's happening with the school board. And this brother's talking about we should do some reparation. Yeah, bear with me. We're going to talk about it. But we're going to agree on some stuff today. And I'm looking forward to it. So here's the thing. Before I get started, I do want to thank Pastor Steve and Dr. Garlow. They've been really gracious to me. They've invited me in, and they've given me a stage, and they've given me the opportunity to impart some things here. And we're going to get into it. I have a slightly different style tonight. Today I was trying to be more preacher and genteel. Tonight I've got my urban edge on, so, I'm going to be like a brother from the hood like I am. I'm going to be plain spoken. And, that's how we're going to do this. And so this is Sunday night. I know we're keeping you away from your family. This is family night typically, and it's the beginning of the week. Y'all want to get home, and I'm in the middle of that. So I'm not going to try to be observant of that and not keep you too long just because. I want to make sure that we spend the time and we actually make this efficient time for you. So when I come to audiences, they say, okay, I tolerated your messages this morning because you were in church. It's Sunday night. I'm looking at your shirt. It looks like Black Lives Matter something. And you're going to talk about CRT, but I'm a little bit distracted with the whole Black Life thing. Can you say something about that? There's an elephant in the room. Can you clear the air for us? So, because some of you're invited by friends, right? And you're saying, okay, there's this Black Lives Matter guy. He's walking around. He's in a church, and I'm my head is jumbled. I don't know what to do here. He seems to be the one that's going to talk about CRT, but yet he's a Black Lives Matter guy. What's going on here, right? So let me clear the air. So when my co-founder and I saw what was happening with BLM last year, and we saw everybody had a visceral reaction to what happened with George Floyd. There was an emotional reaction across the country, what we saw for 9 minutes and 40 some odd seconds, and the emotions ran the span. And but we were troubled because we were troubled with what we saw with George Floyd, but we were mostly troubled because of the reaction, not of the reaction of the people in the community per se, but the reaction of the church in response to the people in the community. The reaction of the church was to join the people in the community in the carnage, and so we were troubled by that. We were troubled because we saw a lot of urban communities being utterly destroyed and Black and brown businesses being burned to the ground by virtue of what I would call white supremacists, the Antifa crowds, who were yucking it up with BLM at their side, burning Black and brown businesses, and a lot of Black pastors and O's just yucking it up with them at the same time. It just didn't make sense to us. So Neil Mommen, who's a co-founder, he says, look, Kev, we need to have, when the emotions calm down and people and pastors, kind of get their senses and they go to back to their homes and they start doing some research on BLM, they're going to realize, maybe we overstepped a little bit. They're going to do some research and they're going to see BLM is all about Marxism, anti-family and anti-father and all of these other things that they're about. And they're going to want a righteous and faithful alternative. And so we should come up with something that is righteous and faithful, that people of faith can join, be a part of, and we can express the full sentiment of Black life. And so we prayed about it for a couple of days, and we decided to start Every Black Life Matters. Now, some people say, well, why did you have to borrow sort of the same moniker? Why did you have to stay in the exact same lane? We did it on purpose. It just so happens that we're not in the same lane as BLM out of a call for supremacy. We believe Every Black Life Matters is a statement of all lives matter or every life matters. Some people say, well, no, you're actually adding partiality. You're trying to make a statement of superiority. No, we're not. And they say, well, how come you're not? You still have Black in your name. All things are equal. Everything's fine. We need to move on. And I say, no, all things aren't equal. All due respect. I understand you believe that, but all things are not equal. And so I have to explain a little bit. And I hope this explanation for you helps you. So if you decide to go ahead and buy some of our t-shirts and you get those questions, you can help them, okay? So here's the deal. Margaret Sanger, who was the founder of Planned Parenthood and family planning clinics, early days, She made the statement, we don't want the word to get out, but I want to fully exterminate the Negro population. She didn't say the Negro and Hispanic, or the Negro and Asian, or the Negro and white. She said, I want to exterminate the Negro population. And unfortunately, they've been very successful at that, to the extent that blacks make up 13% of the population, and yet we make up over 40% of all abortions in America. So where the playing field is here, blacks are being born down here. So when we say, oh no, we need to get over it, the playing field is equal now, just get over it, come on, everything's equal. No, it's not equal. We say every black life matters because we got a delta we got to come up to. That's the statement we're trying to make. Every black life matters because we're trying to make up the delta. We're just trying to say, look, there's a lot of plight that we're just trying to come up to. We're just trying to make things equal. Ours is not a statement of superiority. We're trying to say, look, every black life matters. If all life matters indeed in your mind, then this has to matter to you. That's all we're saying, okay? So we're trying to bring some visibility to the carnage that is still happening in the black community by virtue of Planned Parenthood, okay? So that's all. So for us, it's not superiority. It's not, it's not about, oh, we need to just move on and just, and we're dismissive when we do that. So some people don't understand why people get so agitated when you do that. Everything's equal, all lives matter, every life matters. It's dismissive, right? So that's why it's dismissive. So I hope that helps. Okay, so did we clear the air? Is the elephant gone? All right, let's move on. All right, so let's get to what we want to get to. Let's get to CRT. Here's where we are today. We're going to talk about biblical unity for the community. We are absolutely, definitely, definitively under attack. Why we're here. The primary cause of the issues that we're facing today is because of critical race theory. Critical race theory is absolutely dividing us everywhere, school and everything else we talked about. And the church is definitely involved. We'll talk about that earlier today. So what we need to understand, though, are what are the basic tenets of critical race theory, so we can be able to observe it, we can understand it, we can see it, and then when we start to talk about it in relation to our school boards and that we understand, we can articulate it to them and they could understand where we're coming from. Here's the tip. When they say, what are you doing? You're talking about we're teaching critical race theory to your kids. We're not teaching it. Here's a spoiler. They're not actually teaching it. They're not. The critical race theory, the way they get around it is the critical race theory that's being taught at the collegiate level is not actually being taught at the K through 12 level. That's how they get around it. But it is being taught. The sentiment of it is being taught in this way. And so these are the sentiments of it. This is the sentiment. All whites are racist. All whites are guilty of supremacy. All whites are irredeemable. All whites are victimizers. All whites are oppressors. And all black possess special insights into otherwise unknowable truths. That's fundamentally some of the basic tenets of CRT. The last one is when you get into standpoint epistemology, standpoint theory, and basically get into lived experiences. It delves into some intersectionality where some people say, I don't understand why some of our feminist organizations are not standing up to the trans movement. Intersectionality says the trans people, because they They actually have special insights because they are especially oppressed. So therefore, they have unknowable truths that no other special interest will have. Therefore, they are essentially untouchable, and they're untouchable. Their truths that they have exceed every other group. That's why they're especially powerful. That's why the feminists, so-called, cannot touch a trans in that regard. And that's why you don't see the feminist movement going against the trans movement, because trans people, they have more oppression points, so to speak. It's so convoluted, I don't want to drag us into the trenches in that conversation, but it's basically the more oppression points you have, the more voice you have, and therefore you can speak louder and you are listened to and heard better, and therefore you have more exposure to actually be heard in that community. You understand? You don't understand. Don't worry about understanding, because the whole idea around CRT is it is so mind-blowingly illogical in a lot of ways. There are some very intellectual people behind it, but when you look at it, it is so intellectually dishonest and so arcanely illogical. I mean, so don't feel bad if you don't understand it. Okay, so if you leave here with your mind exploding, that's part of the deal. So don't feel bad. So CRT, by virtue of these definitions, is in and of itself inherently racist. So that's the deal. So when they say we want to teach your children some things, they recast it and they put the sentiments in the little books. They cast George Washington with some of these sentiments in there. They cast him as an oppressor and this and that. They essentially want to teach our children how to hate. Yeah. And that's the diabolical part of their teaching. Because I don't know about you, but I didn't know how to, and I went to an inner city public school growing up, and I didn't know how to hate. And it was in the 60s and 70s. We had a lot of hate going around. We had Black Panthers and all that stuff. And I didn't know how to hate. I didn't. It was life experiences that taught me later, much later on. They want to teach children how to hate at a very early age, 3, 5, 7, 8 years old. Teach them how to do this. This is very, very different than what any of us have probably ever have even thought about or endured in our own personal lives. This is a different dance that they want to teach our children. So that's what makes it dangerous. Okay? Here's a simple exercise. And I want you to understand that you can do this. Please take notes, and you can come up with even better examples than this. This is a powerful exercise that anybody can do at any point in time. Here you go. When somebody goes to prison, we have a social, cultural ethic that when somebody goes to prison and they do their time, they pay their dues. We want to help redeem them, bring them back into our homes, back into society, and help them become a useful citizen again. And we say, okay, you paid your dues. Now, we don't necessarily give them the keys to the castle and give them the keys to all our cars, and we don't even watch them anymore. But we make sure that we keep an eye on them, but we try to encourage them, we try to help them, bring them back into our home, and with some reasonable measures around them, right? We don't still treat them like they're a pariah and they need to be jailed. We try to encourage them along. Is that correct? Okay, all right. So when we had the 9/11, we had President Bush, who said, look, it would be irresponsible for any and all Americans to treat all Middle Easterners as terrorists. And he was right. And we all agreed as Americans, look, we're not gonna cast any blanket aspersions on Middle Easterners just because we got attacked by a handful of Middle Easterners and they did this horrible, atrocious terrorist act on America. It would be racist. It would be complete mischaracterization for Americans to do this to any and all Middle Easterners just because we had a handful of bad apples that did that to us. And we all agreed not to do that. Did we all? Okay. When we had this virus last year, we had President Trump. He kept saying, "Look, this is China virus, but we shouldn't say all Asians. It's their fault, but it's China virus. I'm telling y'all, it's from China." He kept saying it, and we all agreed. We said, "Look, okay, we're not going to hold all Asians responsible for what happened. It would be irresponsible for us to do that." We all agreed it would be irresponsible for us to say off top, "Oh, you're Asian and this virus came from you and millions of people died around the world and therefore I'm going to automatically off top, you're responsible." It would be irresponsible and racist for us to do that. Do we agree? Answer this for me. How in the world then do we make blanket generalizations saying that all white people for all time, past, present, and future, are responsible for all atrocities from the 1800s? Really, this is a truthful question that I want to answer. You progressives, please, if you're here, show yourself. Answer the question for me, please. This is a sincere question. It could be rhetorical for those that know they don't have an answer, but for you, could you answer it, please? We have 3 instances here where we said, look, it would have been irresponsible. For this one, though, we're saying, look, well, yeah, white folks from the 1800s, we're going to do this generalization for all white folks, past, present, and future. You're guilty for everything that's happened since the 1800s. How can we do that logically? Can somebody answer that question? And if you can't, why in the world has no one in the media, no one at your school boards, no one anywhere even asked this simple exercise? How come no one's even brought this up? We haven't done it anywhere in our history where we've generalized guilt for an entire, race of people. We've overlaid guilt for an entire race of people, past, present, and future, for something. And yet we're going to do it now. It's never been done. It's illogical for us to do that. We're Americans, we don't do that. But we're going to do it now? Why? Can somebody answer, please? Is there any answer? I mean, come on. Yeah, you have an answer?
No, sir. What I'm saying is the reason why they're saying that the system's still prevailing. That's what they're saying. I don't agree with that. All I'm saying is that the system of white supremacy and the system where whites are dominant is still prevailing. That's why they're not criticizing it. That's why they're not. The media's not saying anything because they're trying to destroy that system, the white supremacy.
Yeah, no. So here's.
The media and everybody else are sitting and
yeah. Yeah, so you're going to demonize everybody. Babies. Gerber comes out with this thing, and they basically say, look, babies in the womb are white supremacists now. Gerber. So really, this is a real atrocity. And, when are we going to say, look, this doesn't even make sense? When are we going to come up with our own instances, our own exercises, our own scenarios and say, look, you need to lose me with this? Brother, sister, neighbor, Give them this example and have them answer logically. Can you give me a logical answer to this? And if you cannot, could you please just stop it? Just stop it. Here's one of the things that gets me about our elected officials too. We have so many people, 435 total, and the representatives, and we have other people. Why has our elected officials not called anybody out? This is a simple exercise I just thought of off top. We have people being interviewed all the time. Why can't somebody just put together and say, look, here, boom, 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 boom. Please, stop this. Stop the foolishness. Let's just stop this right now. This is the reality. This is what happens. Stop. This CRT stuff is foolish. Get this off the airways. Move along. This is bogus. It's been debunked. That's their favorite word anyway. It's been debunked. It's been debunked. Let's just stop it. This doesn't even make sense. Let's move along. This is foolery. Right? It gets me so incensed, and it gets me incensed because we actually literally have, and some of you have probably been guilted into feeling some kind of way about this. Some of you have probably been guilted. You have friends or family, or you have your children or grandchildren come to you and say, well, are we a white supremacist? And you feel bad. Well, I kind of feel like, excuse me? What? And then some of you are Christians and you actually feel guilty. You have the audacity to be a Christian and feel guilty again? After you laid your guilt on the altar and Jesus did what he did for you? What? Do you know what a slap in the face that is to Jesus? He's looking at you and he's like, what in the world? You got the nerve to put on some guilt again after I did what I did for you? What are you doing? You're saying that what I did for you is insufficient. That's what you're saying. Do you understand what that means? How dare you take on additional guilt from culture after Jesus what he did what he did for you? We need to wake up. For real. For real, for real. We are going to talk about some reparations. It's not about guilt, though. You're going to like it. CRT does this, okay? All right. Let's do some social historical comparisons. Let's take a look. Dr. Martin Luther King says, look, his whole thing was, look, it's a mistake when we do any kind of prejudgment. He says, look, we're going to judge each other based on skills, talents, abilities, character, these types of things that matter. He says, I want my daughters to be judged based on the content of the character, not the color of their skin. This is what he said, right? He did this in 1964. And guess what happened? When he did this, the companies changed. They put guideposts in their employment practices. We had tort reforms. People like me then can go in, and if I didn't get hired unfairly, I had recourse. I had the capacity then to go to HR and say, look, I've been unfairly treated. I had the capacity to make a change within these corporations if I was treated unfairly because of what happened in the 1960s. This is what that man did for me. This is what happened. Now, what we're saying is, with this guy, Kendi, this is how dangerous this guy is. This is what he says. Kendi says, look, we need new policies for discrimination. For discrimination. Now, some people say, oh, Kev, you are imagining things. How is Kendi? He just wrote a book on how to be an anti-racist. What you talking about? He's for discrimination. Oh, let's see. What did this book say? He says the only remedy for past discrimination is present discrimination. This is what this brother says in his book. The only remedy to present discrimination is future discrimination. This is in his book that, by the way, your school boards are reading. They're reading books on how to discriminate. This is what they're reading. This is their Bible. They tell you, we want to make sure that we want to protect your children about how to we want to get rid of all of the Huck Finn and all these, white supremacists, and we're going to get all of the discriminatory, and they read this. How to discriminate. This is what they're reading. This is their Bible. Your school boards and your city councils. And then they want to call you white supremacists. They're reading this guy. Right? Here you go. He literally wants to recodify discrimination. He thinks he's being clever. He wants to codify discrimination for whites. There's a problem with this, though. When you recodify discrimination, there's such a thing as the Equal Protection Clause. Which means if you recodify discrimination, then guess what? Companies can freely discriminate. That means people like me, all of these things, these safeguards that Dr. Martin Luther King put in place, they go away. That means companies will be able to freely discriminate again. Do you understand what I'm saying? Some people, they don't really understand. That means that if we recodify discrimination saying, oh, we're just going to discriminate against white folks, the Equal Protection Clause goes away. It just so happens that the majority of corporations right now today are still being run by white folks. So if the Equal Protection Clause goes away and I come in there for a job, they have every right to say, oh, we don't have nothing, man. And I don't think we want to, blacks in here because we don't want any problems. I have no recourse. All those people who have potential lawsuits right now in the system that may have a legitimate claim, who happen to be black like me, their claims go away. This guy and others like him will do more harm for blacks than you could even imagine. Do you understand what I'm saying? This is foolery on steroids. This is unbelievably foolish. This is what's happening. Okay? It undermines the Equal Protection Clause. Unbelievable. So our question is should we be an anti-racist by codifying laws that encourage discrimination? Or should we redouble efforts to focus on content of character? That's what we gotta, that's the issue. So I hope everybody in here understands what we need to focus on. We need to refocus on content of character. That's the only fair way. Okay? Okay, good. We're on the same page so far. Okay, good. So what's the urgency of the moment for the church? Right now we have division, destruction, we have entire, ministry teams, multi-ethnic teams, me and jacked up, okay? So right now CRT is completely antithetical. Here's why. Based on melanin alone, we have guilt and accusation and, some are being called supremacists within the church and castigated as privilege and all this kind of stuff, right? So here's the thing. The non-negotiable foundations of our faith are faith. Without faith, it's impossible to please God. Love your enemies, pray for those that curse and despitefully use you, right? Matthew 5:44. Love God, and can you love God and then hate your brothers and sisters, right? You know what I'm saying. John 4:20. Those who say they love God and yet hate their brothers and sisters who they see, you cannot love God who you cannot see, who you haven't seen, right? You know what I'm saying. And then forgiveness. Mark 11:26. If you do not forgive, your Father in heaven will not forgive you. And we're going to get on this here in a second. Here's the thing. CRT presents an existential threat to the gospel. I want to say not to the gospel, but to your soul. CRT connotes that faith, that there's no faith in God, that God will not mete out justice, that there's no faith that God will recompense evildoers, there's no faith that God will produce his vengeance. The word talks about vengeance is mine, right? There's no faith that God is the great equalizer. There's no love for enemies. There's no love for past ills. There's no love for neighbors. There's no forgiveness. They believe that past ills are completely unforgivable. There's no capacity to overlook the horrors and plights of past generations, et cetera, et cetera. So here's the deal. I'm going to try to keep moving on because I want to make sure we get to a certain point. Here's the deal that we cannot miss. Mark 11:26. If you do not forgive, you will not be forgiven by your Father in heaven. Now, a lot of people This may be a revelatory for a lot of people. It was for me. I think I've read this before, but it didn't take, with CRT, it takes on a whole new meaning. Because everybody that relies on critical race theory is undergirded by unforgiveness. It's undergirded by unforgiveness. What they're basically saying is, I cannot and I will not forgive for anything that happened in the 1800s. I'm going to hold you responsible. I'm holding your ancestors responsible. I'm holding you responsible. I'm holding your baby in the womb responsible. I'm holding anybody that comes in the future, anybody that just happens to have your immutable characteristics of melanin count in skin, going to be fully responsible. No forgiveness ever. This is what these people believe. These people are damning their own souls. This is a problem. Some of us in here may believe in CRT. Some of us may believe in CRT and actually believe that we're good, God-fearing, God-loving Christians. There's a disconnect here that you have to deal with. I'm not mincing words here. This is the Word of God. I didn't say this. I'm not condemning you. The Word of God does. That's not me. That's what it says. Sorry. I want you to think critically why it's so emphatic. I did a word study on unforgiveness, on forgiveness. Because I said, this is so emphatic. Is it true throughout all of the scriptures? I would encourage you to do it. You'll find it in Matthew 6, in Matthew 18, Mark 11, 25, 26, all throughout the scriptures. It's always conditional. Even the Lord's Prayer. And forgive me as I forgive. The Lord's Prayer. Every time it's conditional. Do you know why? Let me tell you why. I was thinking about this and I said, why is it so emphatic? Why? Why is it so emphatic? And in the middle of the night, I felt the Lord give me some unction on this. He said, son, it's so emphatic. Because demons will bust heaven wide open if it wasn't. This is the one thing they cannot do is forgive. Think about that. Demons won't forgive, right? They will, they will ask for forgiveness. Oh, God, Satan would have asked for forgiveness, but he will not forgive God for whatever. Right? Think about that. And God, in his supremacy, would have, if he changed this eternal value or law, we would have all kind of demonic activity in the perfect heaven. It has to be this way. Do you understand? It has to be. That's why. That's why. If you have unforgiveness in your heart, please get that right. We're in some perilous times. Who knows how long we have? We have people dropping dead and COVID and everything. Just deal with this issue if this is part of your deal, okay? If you're a CRTer or whatever, this is going to take you. So deal with this. Get out of CRT. You need to deal with this, okay? All right. Okay, CRT is built on sand. It's hypocritical. It doesn't make sense. Martin Luther King, civil rights and all that. We dealt with this. A lot of these things we have already talked about. All right. So with what we're doing with Every Black Life Matters, we stand against CRT and its systemic racism. I'm going to ground that here in a second. We reconcile race to race, community to community, family to family, person to person, And at every BLM, we're focused on solutions to achieve reconciliation, not to encourage more and more division. And that's where we stand on this. Help us stop CRT. And so if you want to help us stop CRT, that's another QR code. You can take a picture of that and do that. There's a motive to generate cultural chaos in order for us to have the Great Reset. So I don't know if you're familiar with this. There's a motive to have as much chaos as we can so we can get into this globalist Great Reset. And critical race theory enables that, because as long as we're at sort of a riotous race against race kind of a thing, then it enables us to, if we have a situation where our communities are unstable because we're at each other, then it enables the global community to step in and say, the United States is unstable. We have these riots in the street. We have all of these things going on. So the World Economic Council or the NATO or whatever, the globalist police forces can come in and do a reset. And we would be part of that. And I think that's more of the motivation for critical race theory. The other thing that I see is that it's really purely demonic in the sense that they are trying to completely desensitize our children to God. And the reason why I say that is some people wonder why one of the things I didn't talk about is hegemony. Anybody understand what hegemony means? Hegemony is the prevailing overriding influence within a society. So the prevailing overriding influence within American culture is white, cisgendered, Christian male. You've heard this before, right? So critical race theory, they want to go after hegemony, all hegemonic forces. So that's why they're empowering trans, they're empowering all of these other factions to go after all hegemonic forces and tear those down. What they're looking at is if they can get children to not respect hegemony, which would be for our forefathers, our history, and white, cisgendered, Christian male type figures, and tear that apart. And then fundamentally, guess who the ultimate hegemonic force is? It's God. And then think about this. If white children can grow up believing that they're cursed, right? Then, and believing that they're somehow a part of this cursed race, how hard is it going to be for them to connect to a God that supposedly cursed them, had them born that way, right? So trying to have them connect in future generations to the God of creation when they believe that they've been born in a cursed condition, it's much more difficult. So CRT puts a narrative on people that makes it much more difficult for them to connect to God ultimately. So the attack is on our children, and it's on our biblical heritage. And of course it's on our American heritage, but it is much more insidious than that. So I think we should think deeply about where it's really going after, our children and our American heritage as well. Let me just say a couple of quick things about Marxism. Just real quick, I don't want to delve into this too heavily because this is not, just for the sake of time, I don't want to get into the whole Marxism discussion. But there were some precursors to Marxism. Plato wrote a thesis, a paper called Plato's Republic, then Thomas More, which was Utopia, Thomas Hobbes, which was Leviathan, and then Hegel, and then Marx and Engels started their works. And basically all the underlying aspects of all of their iterations were masterminds, planned economies, utopian. The common denominator was the fundamental thesis where they were considering what if there is no God, right? The only one that would have been potentially not an atheist would have been Thomas More. He was more of a deist. I think he believed in God. He was more of a Catholic, but everybody else was a virulent atheist. Okay, so Marxism in and of itself is demonic. There is it is absolutely demonic. Critical race theory is demonic. The roots of it comes from demonism. There is no other way to say it. So it's not only demonic in the sense that it's undergirded with unforgiveness. That in itself is but it's all Marxist. Let me connect the dots further. These are the philosopher kings, but I want you to see something here. These are the pictures of the individuals who started this, okay? Plato, Thomas More, Hegel, Thomas Hobbes. I want you to see something. I want you to see the pattern. I want you to see something. Evolutionary Marxist, Darwin. Now, this is what I want you to take to your school boards. You want talking points to take to your school boards? Here you go. You want to know the first person who talked about white supremacy? You want to know who the first person who talked about Aryan supremacy? It was their boy, Darwin, Charles Darwin. It was their boy. Let me tell you exactly what he said. Charles Darwin said, let me give you the exact thesis, because this is important. The origin of the species, the preservation of favored races in the struggle of life. That was Charles Darwin. This is in the late 1800s. Now, the reality is we did have races, the concept of races in the 1800s, because we had slavery, obviously. He popularized it as a social distinction. It didn't really exist as a social distinction. In other words, white supremacy as a distinction was not popularized until this man, Darwin, popularized it. Aryan supremacy was something he actually came up with. Yeah. And from him is when we got eugenics. Started with Darwin. So if you want to go to and then in his works, he equated people like me with apes and savages in his writings. So we have these school boards that are talking about, we want to insulate your children from white supremacists, and from, we want to make sure that they're, that they're insulated from this. Well, okay, good, okay, we got you. You took Huck Finn off. You took Dr. Seuss off. You did all this. Okay, great. In alignment with your standards, we say we're going to give you until the next meeting, because it's your standards, to take all of Darwin's works and all of his curriculum out of our children's learnings. This is what you must do. This is not even an argument. Do your homework. Do your homework. This is white supremacy right here. Aryan supremacy, Darwin, okay? Can we agree on that? Yes. Okay, that's the first chapter. White supremacy, Darwin. His protégés, Marx and Engels. From there, we got eugenics. This is where it started. But I don't want you to miss this. Take a look at the faces. These guys' faces. Right there, right there. Then, these guys are the masterminds of CRT. They escaped Hitler's Germany, came here, set up shop in Columbia University, the Frankfurt School, started critical theory out of the Frankfurt School in the 1970s, or no, 1930s. And then in the 1970s, Derek Bell took their works and started critical race theory. They started critical theory, then critical legal theory, and then critical race theory. Look at these guys' faces, okay? This is where it started. And then now we have cultural Marxist World Economic Council. There is something about the faces that I want you guys to take note of. Exactly. They're all white. All of them. We have all these brothers all across the country talking about, oh yeah, white supremacy, blah, blah, yeah. And look, what? Excuse me? I think y'all being duped. Look at what's y'all carrying water for a bunch of white folks that have y'all out here all agitated. Everybody, they set up the system and y'all out here acting a fool for a bunch of white folks who set up the system for you. What in the world is going on here? Look at these people. All of them set up the system so these people couldn't act a fool in the streets. Do you understand what I'm saying? What's the deal here? I mean, do you understand the disconnect that's going on here? I'm just trying to make it plain. I'm just trying to make it plain here. This is a brother just talking straight talk, okay? Okay. Then the World Economic Council, all those white folks, to show you the degree of agitation, they just wrote this article last week, 3 vital steps for uprooting racism in university campuses. All those white folks right here in Europe wrote this article in a U.S. publication talking about racism on our campuses. They are trying to agitate something in our streets. It's part of their plan. World Economic Council wants the Great Reset. They're trying to drive us there. That's the point. All right, so this video was 52 years ago. This brother right here, listen to it. You think that everything that we're going through, this is viral, this just happened organically, and this is 52 years ago. Listen to what he's saying. Everything that we're going through right now has happened 52 years ago.
Here is a book. It's entitled Color, Communism, and Common Sense by Manning Johnson. Manning Johnson was a Negro, and he was also a member of the Communist Party. He joined the party as a young man because he honestly believed that the communists were trying to improve the conditions of his people. He was a dedicated communist. But after many years, Manning Johnson finally came to the realization that the communists weren't the least bit interested in improving the conditions of the Negro people. He discovered that instead they were merely planning to use his people, and these are his words, to use them as cannon fodder in a bloody revolution to destroy America. As early as 1928, the communists declared that the racial differences among our people constituted the weakest and most vulnerable point in our social fabric. By constantly probing and straining at this one spot, they calculated that eventually the cloth could be torn apart and that Americans could be divided, weakened, and perhaps even set against each other in open combat. We must not be led into placing the blame for the riots, the civil disorders, on the Negro people of our nation. Even those few who are promoting hatred and violence in the black communities are not themselves the cause. They're merely being used by forces far bigger than they are to promote the violent phase of the revolution in America. Hoping to avoid further violence and bloodshed, the public is to be pressured into accepting measures that will move the country gradually and legally toward communism, but without calling it that. The strategy of the proletarian revolution calls for the quiet conversion of our government into a communist regime, but under the banner of socialism. The new program of the Communist Party on this subject has this to say. The term socialism describes but the first stage of a new society that in its full development is called communism. Socialism is a transitional stage. The building of socialism is the communist revolution in America. It represents the process whereby our country can be moved gradually toward communism without the people even being aware of it. They have one and only one solution for all problems: more government, and then more and more until it's total government. Total government is communism. We must not be fooled into thinking that the causes of our civil turmoil are such things as poverty, poor housing, lack of education, and similar social or economic factors. As a matter of fact, most of today's self-styled revolutionaries, black and white, come from good homes, could earn better than average incomes if they wanted to work. And in fact, they're products of some of the finest institutions of higher learning. We mustn't resort to violence either as a means of furthering political or social goals. And we must do everything humanly possible to discourage others from doing so. We must support our local police. Nothing can be quite so damaging to police morale and efficiency as converting every arrest into a trial of the policeman instead of the criminal. Now, in passing, ladies and gentlemen, you may have wondered why the Communist Party has been a staunch supporter of the drive to place a black studies curriculum into our high schools and colleges. Well, the reason becomes obvious the minute you take a look at the textbooks and the study guides. Under the guise of academic balance, these courses have become a brilliant device for conditioning young people to accept still one more part of the total program for revolution. We must discover the identity of those individuals, both above and below, who consciously are furthering the communist program for revolution, and then remove them from their positions of trust and leadership. Now, of course, the minute you begin to think along these lines, you'll become the target of a whole barrage of attacks. You'll be called a right-wing extremist, a fascist, or at least a dictator. Some years ago, I happened to attend a meeting where several anti-communist refugees from behind the Iron Curtain were called upon to relate their personal experiences. One of the refugees spoke up and he said, "You know, I came to America expecting to find a nation of free men, but instead, I find exactly the same thing. Everywhere I look, I see men and women who know that communists are making headway in this country. They know that something must be done and that someone must stand up to them. But they themselves do nothing. They remain silent because they're afraid that if they speak out or take a stand publicly, it'll be bad for business. They may lose a client. They may even lose their jobs. If communism should ever come to America, we'll face more death, destruction, and human suffering than any people in history has ever faced at the hands of their invading conquerors. It's literally a question of life and death for all of us. And it's about time the American people began to face up to that fact and to act accordingly.
We think that, we kind of find ourselves in these times, police, ethnic studies, all these things. No, it happened before. It's been happening. This is what it is. So it's amazing to see things repeat themselves, to see things that's been scripted all this time. And I just thought that, we should know that there's more to this. There's a strategy to it. It's been going on for a long time. It's repeating itself. All these things are. So anyway, we're going to deconstruct supremacy, systemic racism, and the need for reparations. Here we go. There is racial bias. You want to talk about it? Let's talk about the NFL. NFL, here we go. This is what happened this year. You may not have heard about it. This is what the NFL did, and Kaepernick and Black Lives Matter were silent. This is what the NFL said this year by virtue of this big pot of money that they had set aside for CTD, CTR, whatever it is, with the traumatic injury for their ex-players. So here's the deal. They had this big pot of money. Black players who, let's say I was an offensive guard, some years ago, black player. And let's say I was an offensive guard and I had this traumatic injury. And there was a white offensive guard. We both played the same position, same year, retired the same year. The white offensive guard was getting $700,000 from this big pool, and I get a check for $70,000. NFL says, yeah, oh, here's your check, Kev, and here's your check, bro. And I say, how much you get? Oh, I got $700,000. And he said, how much you got? I got 70. And the NFL said, oh, well, you got 70, Kevin, because you're feeble-minded. Your upside is not as much as his. This year, the NFL did that. This year, just a few months ago. This was happening now this year. They were saying blacks don't have upside. The NFL. While they have Black Lives Matter on all their sidelines, they're saying blacks, well, I mean, you guys, your brains or your cognitive abilities don't measure up to whites. Literally, this is what they were saying this year. No Kaepernick, no Black Lives Matter, nobody complained about this. I mean, there were some people complaining because they changed it when there was enough outcry. It got out. And me and some other, I wrote an article and some other people said, well, this is crazy. Blacks are feeble-minded, and our upside is limited? So you're going to give us a lot less? To even think about giving us anything less. All football players are putting their life on the line every time that snap the ball. How dare you say, well, white players got more upside than you do. The cognitive ability is more than yours, so we got to give them more. Excuse me? The NFL have the nerve to be a woke league. Black Lives Matter all over the sidelines still to this day. Kneeling and all this, that they don't do anymore. I mean, that they do, and they don't even do the anthem anymore. They do all this kowtowing to the culture and to the mob, and they do this kind of foolishness. I mean, for real. I mean, my wife was, she was like, what are you doing down there? I was yelling and screaming and throwing a tantrum. I was like, what? Golly, she couldn't restrain me. I don't even want to tell you the words that was coming out of my mouth. I had to repent. Oh, my goodness. What in the world? Woo. So anyway, they changed the policy after the outcry for several months. And they started trying to fix it. But anyway, that's real racial bias right there. Okay? So we do have instances of racial bias. And we need to be on check. We need to make sure that don't happen. Okay? So is there white supremacy? Yes. When and where? Okay, I already talked about this. We talked about the one. So let's take a look. So origin of species by means of natural selection, preservation of favorite races and struggle for life. This is his exact quote. At some period, not too distant future, measured by centuries, the civilized races of man will almost certainly exterminate and replace the savage races, read black and aborigines, throughout the world. This is Darwin. This is one of his more tame quotes from that. But again, he basically disparaged blacks and aborigines in that document as apes and savages. Just one step away from that. One step away from, he basically said the Aryan race is this, and he did his, kind of equivalency there in that document. So is there white supremacy today? Yeah, so this is the kind of thing. So here. What I like to do is to make sure that we are adept with reframing arguments, and this is a lost art. To your point, young lady, when you were talking about when are we, critical thinking, we have a tendency to think when people say about white supremacy, and this is why I get away with talking about white supremacy and reparations and this, because I'm not talking about it in terms that you're thinking about it. I'm reframing it all the time. When people say white supremacy, you're always thinking about the man who tweets. It's not white supremacy. We see white supremacy all the time. We see white supremacy all the time. When I have my mayor of my city in San Francisco, who's yucking it up and partying and having a good old time without a mask, when she's demanding everybody in San Francisco wear a mask, that's supremacy right there. It's just what happens she's black. But that is supremacy. And I call her out. No, wait a minute. I wrote an article and I had some interviews about that. No, that's supremacy. Wait, sis, what's up with that? You're being a supremacist right here. That's supremacy. You need to be called out on that. When we have AOC at the gala doing her thing, yucking it up and having a good old time, all of her servers around her got a mask on. She makes sure they have a mask on. She's up there just yucking it up with no mask. How dare you? Wait a minute. Wait. You're a rep. You're supposed to have a mask on. You demand everybody else do. You are being a supremacist. How come we never call these people out on their supremacy? We allow them to call us white supremacists, but we never call them out on their stuff. Where's our backbone as Americans? What happened to us? For real. I mean, time out for this. If they're going to call us white supremacists, just flippantly, every little thing going to call us white supremacists, no, you are supremacists. I have a governor of California who demands that, everybody in between bites even, I want you to wear a mask. And he was just yucking it up with all his friends at the most expensive restaurant in the world. That brother's a white supremacist for real. And then he just last week, he talking about, every kid, K through 12 need to get the vax. And they asked him, they said, well, what are your kids vax? Well, no. They said, your daughter, no, she's not vax. Excuse me, bro. You are a supremacist. That's right. That's what a supremacy. You don't understand what a supremacy is. Supremacy means I have a certain standard for me, and I got a different standard for you. That's what supremacy is. That's what supremacy is. Then we have this here. Nancy Pelosi says, look, I'm a pro-lifer, and me and my family, we all pro-lifers and all that. But for poor women, we need to make sure they tax-funded abortions. Oh yeah, for black and brown women, we need to make sure we kick them. We make sure we kick them to the abortion clinics. We need to eliminate them. Excuse me? And nobody called her out on this statement? How dare she? That is a supremacist statement if I ever heard one. How come nobody called her out on this? Do you see what she said? Yep. That's supremacy, folks. That's right. How dare you? What are you talking about? Then we have the government. We're going to use researchers, and we're going to do some organ harvesting and stuff, but we're going to use minority babies strictly on this. Supremacy. Right? Then we have this lady who wrote a journal. She says, dear God, help me to hate white people. She's a supremacist. She's a black lady. She had the nerve to write a prayer journal. This is part of her prayer journal. Here's what Dr. Martin Luther King said. Black supremacy is just as dangerous as white supremacy. And God is not interested in merely the freedom of black men. God is interested in the freedom of the whole human race and in creation and society where all men can live as brothers and sisters. So here's what I want us to wrap our minds around. We need to keep our eyes and ears open for supremacy, period, and call it out whenever and wherever we see it. If the standard changes for you and me, and somebody in authority says, it's a different thing, we need to call it. Excuse me, sir, you're being a supremacist. That's supremacy. And we need to write articles, we need to do whatever we got to do and call people out on it. They make sure they call us out on stuff all the time, and it don't even make sense. So let's play the game. You're a supremacist. Let's do it. All right? Okay. What is systemic? Now we're going to get to systemic racism. What is systemic? Here's the deal. Systemic refers to something that is spread throughout a system. The body, economy, market, or society. A lot of people were talking about systemic racism. All law enforcement is systemic racism. That's why they're talking about defunding the police. Law enforcement cannot be systemically racist. I'm just going to get that on the table. That's not what I'm talking about when I said we're going to agree on systemic racism. No, I wasn't going to say law enforcement is systemic racism. So you can relax. No, it's not law enforcement. By their definition, it's not law enforcement. Why? Simple reason. I did a little bit of research. Law enforcement in total, so back office, front office, and sheriffs and all law enforcement agencies. Bureau of Labor Statistics. Law enforcement is actually made up of a slightly majority minority, about 57% minority, if you include back office in all the agencies. So, our leftist progressive friends say minorities cannot be racist because they don't have power. So again, we're using their definitions. So because the ones who say systemic racism, who cry it all the time, let's use their definitions. If we use the ones who cry systemic racism all the time, use their definition. If minorities cannot be racist, law enforcement don't fit the definition of being systemically racist. Sorry. Does that make sense? Okay. So let's take law enforcement off the table. However, there is some systemic racism by their definition. It's an inconvenient truth for them, so let's take a look. And this particular thing also is a good case for reparations. So we can kill a couple of birds with one stone. Couple of examples here. Here's some inconvenient truth. In the early 1800s, there was an all-white, supremacist, racist entity. It was a particular faction. These people absolutely hated blacks. They were all white supremacists. They were racist and absolutely hated blacks. Okay? All right. So they enshrined slavery. They ensconced progressive judges and legislators. That was one of the first things they did. They said, look, we want to make sure we get some progressive judges and legislators. We want to put them in who had our particular faction, our particular mindset. All right? So when we did have different types of cases come to them, like Preston versus Ferguson, Jim Crow, and Dred Scott's, and those types of things, they made sure, because they had this particular mindset, that they encouraged and elongated and encouraged slavery. These people, again, this particular faction hated blacks. They were white supremacists. They were privileged, and they would do anything to degrade and malign blacks. These people hated blacks. They were supremacists. When we did get something that would have helped blacks, like the Homestead Act, the Homestead Act would give blacks land, allow them to till the land and actually become self-sufficient. They put their people overseeing the Homestead Act. So you know what happened? When blacks during Reconstruction, that would have, been able to qualify for parcels of land, instead of giving that lands to blacks, newly emancipated blacks, they made sure to give land to newly immigrated Europeans because they hated blacks. They hated blacks. They were racist, white supremacists. They hated blacks. They wanted to make sure they kept blacks down. This particular faction. When Abraham Lincoln was assassinated, he did sign off on 40 acres and a mule. He signed off on it. It just so happens his vice president was of this particular faction. He took that off the table because he hated blacks like these other people. He was a white supremacist. He was a racist. He hated blacks. He said, no, give them inwards nothing. Yeah, that was him. So what happened? Well, let's see. The 1900s came. This particular entity, this is what they did. It continued. They encouraged and supported a militia called the KKK. You guys are familiar with them down here. No disrespect. But this particular faction, this is their doing because they hated blacks. And when we had opportunities, 13th, 14th, 15th Amendment, and all of these other things, segregation, then eugenics, and all these other things. Because they hated blacks, this is their doing. All of these things. Destruction of the nuclear family, dependence, voted with overwhelming majority against all proposed civil rights acts. These people hated blacks, and to this day, I say, they still have disdain for blacks. They'll use them, but there's no real love for blacks. Systemic. All the way up until just recently, there's a few blacks, but systemic in the sense that the entire system is a particular mindset to take advantage, malign, and use blacks. Ideally, degrade blacks. It's been like that forever. How do we make the case for reparations? Here's the deal. If I ran over my neighbor's dog, I can't say, look, Your Honor, I ran over my neighbor's dog, yeah, but I'm in the city limits. The entire city needs to help me pay for my neighbor's dog. A judge would look at me like, Mr. McGary, you out of your mind. You ran over your neighbor's dog. How are you going to say the entire city needs to help you pay for that man's dog? It's crazy. It's a crazy argument. For anybody to cry for reparations when you actually still have the perpetrators of these horrible harms still here. The entity is still here. And they still have billions at their disposal. They need to pay reparations. And the good news is they're the ones who are crying for reparations. They're the ones who are crying for, they want reparations. So I say, look, reparations are never to be applied across entities that had never had anything to do with it. If the entity is still intact, and you could lay it at the feet of the entity that did the harms, that entity needs to be held fully responsible for those harms. They need to pay reparations. If there's a cause for reparations, they need to pay. Agree? There you go. Told you, reparations, we agree. Systemic racism, part 2. Here you go. Margaret Sanger. This is what she says. We want to fully exterminate the Negro population. Frequent speaker at the Women's KKK. Called black reckless breeders, weeds, scourge of society. Here's the problem. A lot of people say, well, come on, Kev. Come on. Margaret Sanger, she wanted to help women. No. This is where people get messed up with this. Her business plan was, I want to exterminate blacks. That was her business plan. That was her business model. It wasn't, I want to help women, and I think I want to exterminate blacks at the same. No. Her business model was, I want to exterminate blacks. She was a eugenist. Then she said, now we need to make this acceptable to society. We need to round off our services so people don't just see that we're just killing blacks. So maybe we should, maybe we can have some family planning and do some other things. But the model was kill blacks. That's right. That was the model. So, when we have these people that come up and say, well, they do a lot of systemic racist is her model. Don't get it twisted. You can support them if you want, but you have to understand what they're about. They're about killing blacks. Take it or leave it. That's what they were about then and now. Because here is the inconvenient truth. Blacks make up 13% of the population. Planned Parenthood puts 80+%, 80 to 90 in some areas, some cases, of all of their abortion clinics in black communities. And now we make up 40% of all abortions. 13% of the populations, excuse me. Why does that make sense to anybody? Supply demand? No, sir. That doesn't make sense. If it's all about supply and demand, look, okay. I'm not the sharpest instrument in the shed, okay. But look, if it's supply and demand, you just want to help women, okay, great. Walmart and Target has already done great demographic research for women. If you want to help women, and you just want to be where women congregate, you put a Planned Parenthood on the back end of every Target and Walmart across the country. You would. That's what you would do. You meet the need. And guess what? Black women go to Target and Walmart too. It's fine. Why would you specifically be in highly urbanized areas? Some people say, well, I still don't see the harm in that. Here's the problem. Black girls in my community in New York, some of them experience up to 18 abortions before they're 20. How does that happen? When you go to certain communities in New York, there's tons of abortion, Planned Parenthood billboards, and just inundated in those communities. And they're in every school in New York. When these girls get in trouble, they use Planned Parenthood as contraception. And they're encouraged to do it that way. Some of those are chemical abortions. They're not all surgical. But the body doesn't know the difference. So when those girls get old enough and they may want to really start a family or get married, their bodies can't handle it. We are decimating. We're decimating the black community with this. If we love our neighbor, we must do something about this. This is disproportionately targeting our black babies and our black young women. And it's having a devastating impact. So please, be compassionate, loving, and just have a different approach to this. This is not acceptable. This really is a scourge. Target it. Stand against systemic oppression and racism. We're going to stand against Planned Parenthood racism, and we're going to stand. The perfect example of systemic racism is critical race theory. Again, systemic means up, down, in and out, through and through the entire system. Everybody within CRT has that ideology. It self-perpetuates, right? Everybody who teaches CRT teaches racism. They're teaching the ideology of CRT, which means it literally fits the definition of systemic. So, CRT is the perfect definition of systemic racism. You believe this? They're getting us wound up about systemic racism, and CRT is literally the definition of systemic racism. It's unbelievable. It's unbelievable. So, I pray that this has been helpful for you. I hope it's been useful. I have some books, I have some shirts. Please join us. If it's been helpful, I hope I grounded that reparations, systemic racism, right? And white supremacy. I mean, Darwin and that was hopefully illuminating for you, that we do it. And we do have supremacy. We have some people that they're supremacists, man. They've got a whole different standard for themselves. It's all over the place. And we need to be better about calling it out. God bless you. Thank you for all your time.